Okay. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining. A couple things. First of all, um, we're back after Shavuos. We had a 1 week break, and God willing, we'll continue this. And if there's any change, we'll let you know. Um, okay, hold on 1 second. Just getting this up here. Um, if you like these classes, I really appreciate it. If you want to sponsor a class, sponsorships are available. Helps us continue doing these classes. And I think that's pretty much it. So let's jump right in. Hold on 1 second, just trying to get my material up here. Okay. All right. Okay. So this week we're actually going to be studying Pirkei Avos, the ethics of our fathers. The Pirkei Avos are the Mishnah that discusses ethics. Most Mishnahs discuss laws. However, Pirkei Avos, and we've studied them before, it discusses ethics, and however, it's still a Mishnah, which means it still has maybe not the authority of like a set law. You can't really make morals and authority. It's something to strive for, but it's just as important in Judaism. And the custom is that to learn these teachings during the time of Sfiras Omer, which we just concluded with the holiday Shavuos. However, there's a custom that is brought in the Chabad custom as well to study these the entire summer. So, starting the Shabbos, we're going to restart Pirkei Avos for the second time. It usually ends up being about 3 or 4 times throughout the summer months. There's 6 chapters, so we're going to study this week. We'll do a little bit on something of the Torah portion of, the Pirkei Avos portion that we study on the Shabbos of this week, which is chapter 1. So, chapter 1, Mishnah 12, says as follows. Hillel v'Shammai kibul mehem. So the Mishnah starts off explaining the trajectory, if you will, the Masorah, the Jewish tradition. And in the line of the Jewish tradition, it starts off, obviously Moses gets from Sinai, Joshua gets from Moses. Next is in the chain later on is Hillel and Shammai. So he says a few saying, every single one has a saying. So Hillel and Shammai received from their teachers, and Hillel says 3 teachings. So let's start with the first one. The first one is Hillel says, "Having been Talmidav Shel Aharon, you should be from the students of Aaron. You shall love peace, pursue peace, love people, and bring them close to the Torah." Okay. What is that? What does that mean? So, our sages tell us, the commentaries on the Mishnah say, how did Aaron love peace and pursue peace? He would see people arguing, and he would go to the guy and he would say, "You know what? Your friend is very regretful about what he did." And then he would go to the other guy and he would say, "You know, the other guy, he's also regretful." And then they would meet each other and they would hug and embrace and ask for forgiveness. In other words, he would basically lie to them and say that the other one was upset at the other guy. And how did he draw people closer to the Torah? So the Mishnah commentaries in the Mishnah say, he would, if he saw somebody who did a sin, he would befriend them. This is Aaron. This is the high priest. He spoke to God himself, and Aaron would become friends with them, and that person would become ashamed. And he would say, if Aaron knew who I was, he would never be my friend. And the person would repent because he would feel the friendship of Aaron. Very important lesson. That's the first lesson of Hillel. The first teaching of Hillel. Second teaching is a little bit different. He says as follows, and he said this is in Aramaic, so it's not going to be your usual Hebrew. Aramaic is a Jewish language of the Talmud, not the language of the Mishnah. There's very few references to Aramaic in the Mishnah. The Mishnah was written in Hebrew, Lashon HaKodesh. So let's see what he says. Negad Shema, one who advances his name, Avad Shmei, he loses his name. Udula Moisef Yosef, and if someone does not add, he diminishes. Udula Yalef Katalachayev, and one who does not teach is deserving of death. Udeshtamish Pitaga Chalaf, and one who uses the crown shall die. Okay, so what does that mean? So, Negad Shema, Avad Shmei, the first part says, one who advances his name destroys his name. What does that mean? It means if you try to make your name with authority in basically dictatorship, you will end up losing your name, because authority is the downfall, is the downfall of people. In other words, you try to make yourself too famous, no one, that's going to be your downfall. The next part is, if you don't add, you're going to decrease. Is in the study of Torah. If you don't increase in the study of Torah, you will lose what you will forget what you already learned. One who doesn't teach is liable to death, because you have to. If you know something, you have to teach it. Okay, and one who makes use of the crown, that he explains, one who makes use of the crown of Torah, like a person who uses his tools, will perish and leave the world. Some explain that the crown is the initials of Taga in Aramaic, is the initials of Talmud Gavra Acharina, the student of another man, as is forbidden to take students from students that are not his students. So the basic explanation is, don't use the crown, don't use the glory that comes with Torah study for any personal gain. One is that you shouldn't take students from someone else. That's the abbreviation of Taga. And another explanation brought is, if a person uses God's name in vain, the Shem HaMefarish, the name, the way it's pronounced, the way it's spelled, perishes and is lost, as he did not have a share in the world to come. Okay, that is the second teaching of Rabbi Hillel. The third teaching is, Imein anili mili, if I am not for myself, who is for me? Uchshani la'asmi moni, and if I am for myself, what am I? V'im le'achshav, and if not now, Amosai when? Okay, very poetic, by the way, all these teachings, especially the second two. So he says, if I am not for myself, I do not attain merit for myself, who will attain merit for me? And when I am for myself, even if I have attained merit for myself, what is this merit and what is it worth compared to what I am obligated to do? And then, v'im le'achshav, if not now, in this world, then Amosai, then when, since after death, it is impossible to attain merit any longer. So in other words, if I don't do what I'm obligated, when else am I going to do it? Okay? And the last one is, if not now, in the days of youth, then how will it work, when I'm old? Okay, so that is the three teachings. So here is the $1 million question. We said that the second teaching of Hillel, which was Negad Shema Avad Shmei, if you make yourself great, and you're going to actually, that's what makes yourself, ends up being the person's downfall. We explained that that is in Aramaic. Now, again, as we said, seemingly the Mishnah was all written in Hebrew, and this is one of the only teachings, not only in the Mishnah, but even in Avos, this is one of the only teachings that is in Aramaic. Let's look at the other exception in Avos, and maybe we could figure out why this teaching is in Aramaic. What is the other Aramaic? We have the teachings of Ben Bagbag and Bar Hehe. Some great names. Ben Bagbag and Ben Hehe. So what did they say? So Ben Bagbag says, this is in chapter 5 of Avos, of the Ethics of Our Fathers. Ben Bagbag would say, Hafachva v'afachva dekulba. Delve and delve into the Torah, as you will see. Everything is in it. Uvasach zeva v'sivuv leba umina le'sazur she'en l'chamid d'tayva imena. Grow old and worn with in it. Do not budge from it. See with it. Grow old and worn with it. Do not budge from it. There is nothing better. Okay, so he's telling us everything's in the fountain of the Torah, and you could see everything in the Torah and continue to study Torah, because nothing better. And then Ben Hehe said, "L'fum tzara agra." According to the pain is the reward. So these two teachings are also in Avos, so maybe it's not such a big deal that Hillel said a teaching in Aramaic. There's just one problem. Ben Bagbag and Ben Heihei had a very different life story than Hillel. They were converts. And in fact, the the name Ben Heihei, why did he choose the name Ben Heihei? Because um, he was referring to the fact that he was a convert. Converts, our sages tell us, are the children of Abraham and Sarah. Abraham and Sarah. And what is special about Abraham and Sarah is that before they were Abraham and Sarah, they were Avram and Sarai. And God added a hey to their name. So he chose the name Ben Hey, and in tribute to the fact that he was now the child of Abraham and Sarah, that God had added the letter Hey to their name. So he said, I am children of the people that God added the letter name Hey to their name. And Ben Bagbag similarly has the same name because Bag, Beis, and Gimel together is Hey. So he also chose, by the way, there are some opinions, I've seen some opinions that say they were actually the same person, but that's neither here nor there. Either way, even if it was a different person, Ben Bagbag also is in tribute because the Hey is 5, Beis and Gimel together is 5. So Ben Bagbag and Ben Hey has the same numerical value. So he's saying I'm a son of Abraham and Sarah. Okay. So why does that matter that they are converts? Because this is the beginning of their teaching or learning, and they obviously were not so familiar with Hebrew, so they spoke in Aramaic. And since they spoke in Aramaic, they taught in Aramaic. And they were using the fact that we have to know God, we have to know God in all our ways, as our sages tell us. So we have to know God in all our ways. So including that was the way he studied, that was the way he understood. So their teaching was in Aramaic. So it makes a lot of sense for Ben Heihei and Ben Bagbag to have their teaching in Aramaic. In other words, that itself is a teaching that these people were converts, and they didn't wait until they studied Hebrew and knew everything, right? And they were on the contrary, they felt this was the opportunity to teach others in Aramaic. So okay, so that makes sense. But Hillel, we can't say that about Hillel. Why? Hillel was no convert. Not only was he not a convert, he was the descendant of King David. He was from the house of the Nasi, of the leader of the Jewish people, and later he becomes the Nasi. So Hillel has a whole different life story. He was not a convert. He's the descendant of King David. He ends up becoming the leader of the Jewish people, as we'll see momentarily. And if that's the case, why would he be someone who would teach something in Aramaic? And again, all his other teachings are in Hebrew. His first teaching and his third teaching in Avos, right before and right after are Hebrew. So why would he change to Aramaic? Okay. So, in a way, actually, this story of Ben Bagbag and Ben Heihei is actually the key to understanding what's going on with Hillel. Because Ben Bagbag and Ben Heihei, we see that this teaching of theirs follows their life story. In other words, they were converts, their native language was not Hebrew, therefore they taught in Aramaic. That was their life experience. And we actually see this throughout Pirkei Avos, that actually all these rabbis, we see their life experience, they're kind of telling their story and the experiences they had and the lessons that they learned from their personal experience. So what is the experience of Hillel that would inspire these teachings? So let's go back to the first teaching. The first teaching of Hillel was be a student of Aaron, love peace, pursue peace, love people, and bring them close to the Torah. And we explained before how Aaron accomplished that. So what is Hillel's life story that would impose this, that would highlight this teaching? So what was the story? There was a story that there was a non-Jew who once came to Shammai. And Shammai was, as we mentioned earlier, Shammai and Hillel are both quoted together, first Hillel and then Shammai. Shammai and Hillel served together as leaders of the Jewish people. And a non-Jew once came to Shammai and said, please make me a convert me to Judaism, but he had conditions. What's the condition? On condition that you teach me the entire Torah standing on one foot. That was the condition. So Shammai took a builder's a building stick, and he chased him away. So the guy is dejected, but he goes to Hillel. He goes to his counterpart, and he says, "I want you to be. I want to be a convert on condition that you teach me the entire Torah while I stand on one foot." Hillel said to him, "No problem. Whatever your friend hates, don't. I'm sorry. Whatever you hate, don't do to your friend." In the Aramaic, it's "Dalach sani lechavercha lo'isaved." Whatever you hate, don't do to someone else. And then he said, "This is the entire Torah. Everything else is commentary. Go and learn it." So this non-Jew, had this teaching, and he understood. He got the message that this person, that obviously he was inspired to actually become a convert, but even more, he got the message that there is much more to the Torah than standing on one foot. This isn't a mantra that you could just know one thing. Okay, then there was another story of a non-Jew who wanted to convert. And why? Why did he want to convert? Because he heard a bunch of little children studying Torah, and when they were studying Torah, they were talking about the clothing of the Kohen Gadol, and he said, "Wow, these are such beautiful clothing of an ephod, and there's a robe and a tunic and all these different things." And the Gentiles said, "I have an idea. I'm going to become a convert. I'm going to become the Kohen Gadol, and then I could wear these beautiful clothes." So, so he goes to Shammai, and this non-Jew goes to Shammai, and he says, "I want you to convert me on condition that I become the Kohen Gadol. I become the high priest." Now, obviously, a convert cannot become a high priest. Even a regular Jew cannot become the high priest. It has to be someone who's a descendant of Aaron, who's a priest already. That's something you're born with. Your father was a priest. And even that, not every priest becomes the high priest. There's only one. It's a very special role. So, for example, Hillel and Shammai couldn't even be the high priest. So he goes to Shammai, and he says, "I want you to convert me on condition I can be the high priest." Shammai again takes his building stick and he chases him away. He comes to Hillel and he says the same thing. So he says, "Listen, you want to be the high priest? No problem. You have to go and study all the. You have to study. What is the. You have to study everything it says in the Torah. If you we're not going to make you the high priest just because you asked. If you know everything, we could talk about it." So he goes and he starts to study Torah, and he gets to the part. That it says in the Torah, "V'hazar hakarev yumas," the foreigner who comes close shall be put to death. There's a death penalty for someone who comes into the temple where only the high priest can go, or the priest. So he says. Who does that apply to? He says to Hillel, who does this apply to? He says even King David. Even King David was not allowed to go in the Holy Temple, in the Holy of Holies, and the places where the high priest is going. So the convert starts to think, if King David, King David can go, that means no Jew can go, and no Jew can go, even though God calls them his. God calls the Jewish people his. He had already studied Torah, as we said. He studied that the Jewish people are called God's children, God's firstborn. If God's firstborn can't go, then and they're called foreigners in this scenario, then for sure I can't. That I'm a convert, or becoming a convert, I also can't do it. So the convert comes back to Shammai, and he comes back, and he says to Shammai that he doesn't want to uh, and he says to Shammai as follows. Let me read it inside. He says, "I retract my um, I retract what my demand. I'm willing to convert even if I'm not the high priest." And then, because he says, "What do you mean? I can't be the high priest. A foreigner, even King David can't go." So he said, then he came to Hillel and he said, "Hillel, the patient, may blessings rest upon your head as you brought me under the wings of the divine presence." Okay, that was the story of these converts. And later, um, they met up, these converts, and they said to um, they said to each other, "Shammai's impatience sought to drive us from the world. Hillel's patience brought us beneath the wings of the divine presence." In other words, the fact that they had been inspired by, they were brought in a way of peace, um, that we see here, that actually, even he didn't drive them away, even though they said things that were nonsensical, things that obviously were inappropriate. End of the day, they brought them close to God and they brought them under the wings of divine presence. So we see here how when Hillel said this teaching of loving peace, pursuing peace, we see that this was something that he actually lived. This was a real life experience for him. And we actually look at the words that in the teaching of Hillel, when he says love people, he uses the word people. There's a lot of words in Hebrew how to say people, and the word that he chooses is brios, which means creations. In other words, just the fact that a person was created by God, it's enough to love them and bring them closer to Torah. So we see here that Hillel actually lived this. He brought people close to the Torah, even people who were at that time not Jewish. He said, "You're created by God. That's enough for me to be warm to you and draw you close." Okay, so now we see how that teaching was something that had happened to Hillel. What about the second teaching? Second teaching is based on, we're going to go through another incident in Hillel's life, very important. There was a group called the Bnei Beseira, and they were the leaders of the Jewish people. And one time, and we might have discussed this story before in one of our classes, but this is a little bit different angle, a little bit explaining this teaching of Hillel. And they said, that year, Passover fell out on Sunday. So therefore, the slaughtering of the Passover lamb would have to be on Shabbos. Because that always happens on the day before the Seder. So you could eat the Passover lamb at the Seder. And they didn't know if they couldn't remember, the Bnei Beseira, they couldn't remember if this mitzvah of the Passover lamb, if it overrides the Shabbos or not. So they didn't know what to do. So they said, "Does anybody know?" This is very important. The whole Jewish people is waiting on the Bnei Beseira to decide what's going to be. Are they going to bring the Passover lamb or not? So they said, "You know what? We heard there's a guy. His name is Hillel. He comes from Babylon, and he studied by Shmaya and Avtalion. Those were the previous generation's leaders, and he knows." So he said, "Okay, bring Hillel." They bring Hillel, and he says, "Of course." And he gives a few reasons. I'm not going to get into it all now. He brings numerous proofs that the Passover lamb is brought on Shabbos, and they install him as the new Nasi, as the new leader of the Jewish people, because he knew something and they didn't, something so important. So he gets up there and he starts to chastise them, and he says, What caused you to forget?" He says, "Because you didn't serve the previous generation's rabbis. You didn't. In other words, you didn't get enough apprenticeship by them. And because, in other words, it wasn't that Hillel was smarter or studied more diligently than the Bnei Beseira, but it was that it was really that he had these mentors that he had served them and made sure he learned everything from them. Now, in the story continues that okay, Hillel, we figured out one thing. Let's go to the next topic. What's the next topic? How do you bring your knife to the Holy Temple on Shabbos? So he says, "I knew this law and I forgot it." And the Talmud says, that they actually waited and they saw he said, if the Jewish people, if they are not prophets, they are the children of prophets, and he saw that the people put the the knife either in the wool of the sheep or in the horns of the goats, and that's how they got it to the holy temple on Shabbos. And he said, that is exactly what my teachers taught me, so I was correct in that thing. So the Talmud says, why did he forget this law? He knew the other law. What happened here that he forgot? It says because he chastised the Bnei Beseira, and he has a little bit of ego mixed in. Now, obviously, he was doing the correct thing. He had to tell them off because they had forgotten this halacha, but he did it in a way. And obviously, Hillel is the great Hillel. He's judged to the umpteenth amount, so he was punished, if you will. So now, Hillel obviously was somebody who was not a prideful person, because we know that pride is the antithesis to Torah. So obviously, how could it be that Hillel would be prideful in some way? So the Rebbe explains that Hillel came from Babylon. Bavel comes from the word mixed up, right? If we go back to the story of the Tower of Bavel, the Tower of Babylon, that it was called Bavel because all the nations got mixed up at that time. So it's a place that is associated with darkness. It's associated with without clarity. The Jewish people were exiled to Babylon. They were no longer they didn't have the light of the Holy Temple, the light of the land of Israel, and everything had to be in darkness. And how do you deal with things in darkness? Is you're just kind of feeling things up. You're just trying to see where things are, and therefore, in Babylon there was a ability for, because it was such a dark place, we had to be very wary that people could be that their knowledge could be used to become haughty. Versus in the land of Israel, where you saw godliness, you saw the divine presence, it wasn't necessary to warn against such a negative behavior. And that is why this teaching of Hillel, the second teaching, which was one who advances his name. In other words, in this scenario where Hillel becomes the leader of the Jewish people, that could be his downfall. That had to be said in Aramaic, which is the language that Jewish people used in Babylon, because this was a teaching that was specific to Babylonia. This was a teaching that was not necessarily targeted at the people in the land of Israel. So here is how we're gonna read the teaching based on this life experience of Hillel. So he says, one who advances his name, which means someone who is destroys his name. That teaches us that even that if you want, that when we go into the word negad could also mean lowering, which could mean, like when the Jewish people went to Babylon, when we go into exile, if you go down, that could be, you have to be careful not to go too far. In other words, yes, you're going down into exile. You have to be careful not to allow ego and pride to take over. And one who does not increase diminishes. So we're warned about egotism. We're worried about someone's ego. So we're going to say, okay, if that's the case, I don't want to learn so much Torah. If I study too much Torah, then I'll be prideful. So maybe it's a good idea to not study so much Torah. So Hillel says, no. Just because I'm warning you about pride doesn't mean that you shouldn't study Torah. If you don't continue studying Torah, you're going to forget what you learned. And this also applies to teaching. If you don't teach, you're going to say, listen, I don't want to teach. If I teach, I'm going to be prideful. No. A person has to teach. A person, and if he doesn't, he's liable of the death penalty. And lastly, one who uses the crown, what does that mean? If somebody is using the crown of Torah for personal gain, for personal honor, meaning that he's using the ability the ability to use his Torah knowledge to teach, not just to teach, but also to make halachic rulings. Again, if you use it for personal honor, use it for personal power, that person will perish. Okay, let's go to the last we'll finish up with the last teaching. The last teaching is based on a Talmudic story that Hillel was being happy at the Simchas Beis Shoeva, at the drawing water ceremony, where the Jewish people would be very happy, and all the rabbis would be extremely joyous. He said, "Im ani kan hakol kan." If everyone is here, if I'm here, I'm sorry, everyone's here. And if I'm not here, who is here? So, in relation to that, was his third teaching, if I'm not for myself, who will be with me? So, we see here how these teachings of Hillel were really, and all the teachings of the Pirkei Avos, we see how they're really they weren't just, theoretical teachings. The Pirkei Avos are life-lived experiences of these holy rabbis and these great rabbis, and we were lucky enough that every summer we could study them and focus on them and try to apply them in some way. Thank you very much for joining. Have a good Shabbos, and God willing, we will see you next week.